The room was quiet, almost unbearably so. Outside the heavy oak doors, the world continued unaware, as if the air itself had decided to hold its breath in anticipation. Inside, Princess Anne sat at the head of the polished table, the weight of centuries of history pressing down on her shoulders. The late Queen's final will lay before her, a simple stack of papers that carried the force of an empire. Every line, every carefully chosen word, was a reflection of decades of meticulous thought, of a monarch who had governed not just nations, but the very dynamics of her own family with a precision that was both formidable and intimidating. And today, the quiet corners of the palace would witness the revelation that would send tremors through the very foundations of the royal household. Prince William, normally composed and measured in all things public and private, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His mind raced with possibilities, 1,000 scenarios playing out in rapid succession as his fingers lightly tapped against the armrest. He had always respected his grandmother, admired her intelligence, and understood her unspoken rules about legacy, lineage, and the delicate balance of power. Yet, even he could not have predicted the subtle, yet seismic shock that was about to emerge from the reading of this document. King Charles, too, sat nearby, his posture upright, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The decades of preparing for succession, of navigating the labyrinthine rules of protocol and tradition, seemed suddenly insufficient against the quiet authority of the Queen's final directives. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And then there was Camilla, Queen Consort, whose presence in the room was a study in controlled elegance, yet beneath her calm exterior, a storm brewed. She had risen steadily from the shadows of public scrutiny to become a central figure in the monarchy, but even her careful calculations could not anticipate the quiet, unyielding power embedded in the late Queen's words. Her relationship with the Queen had been, at times, strained, a complex web of loyalty, tension, and public expectation. Camilla's exclusion from what she assumed would be an inevitable inheritance, an inheritance symbolic not merely of wealth, but of trust and legitimacy, was a revelation that would redefine her place within the family and potentially in the eyes of the public. The document itself was deceptively unassuming. At first glance, it was a mere collection of sentences, legal phrases crafted to ensure clarity and enforceability. Yet within those words lay decisions that transcended the realm of law. They were statements of intent, of judgment, of enduring preference. The Queen, who had governed the realm with unwavering discipline and discernment, had chosen to speak one final truth from beyond the grave, a truth that would shock the palace, captivate the public, and challenge assumptions about loyalty, privilege, and the enduring bonds of blood. And cleared her throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. Her eyes swept the room, noting the subtle reactions around her. William's hand tightened around the armrest. Charles's gaze flickered to the ceiling, as if seeking guidance from unseen sources. Camilla's lips pressed into a measured line, concealing any trace of vulnerability. Even Kate, seated slightly apart, seemed to feel the weight of history pressing down upon her, aware that her own position within the family was about to be irrevocably shaped by the words and was about to speak. The reading began. The voice was steady, precise, each syllable deliberate. The Queen's final wishes were laid bare, revealing a choice that was both deeply personal and profoundly symbolic. Camilla was to inherit none of the personal jewelry collection that had been curated over decades, passed down through generations with care and reverence. Instead, the treasures of the late Queen's life, gems that had witnessed coronations, state banquets, and private moments of reflection, were to be entrusted to Princess Kate and Princess Anne. The justification, as the Queen had penned, was to preserve the royal heritage within the direct bloodlines, a decision rooted not in animosity, but in the unyielding logic of legacy and lineage. The implications were immediate and intense. Camilla, whose quiet confidence had been her shield against both media scrutiny and palace intrigue, found herself confronted with a reality she had not anticipated. This was more than an exclusion. It was a statement about her place within the monarchy, a subtle but unmistakable delineation of privilege and inheritance. The room held its collective breath as the weight of the decision settled like a tangible force, pressing against the walls, the furniture, the very air itself. William's mind raced, considering the political and familial ramifications. How would this decision be interpreted by the public? How would the media frame it, knowing that every headline could influence the perception of the monarchy for years to come? Yet, even beyond the optics, William understood the deeper significance. The Queen's choices were never arbitrary. They were deliberate, carefully considered, and often guided by an unspoken understanding of duty, history, and moral expectation. This was a message to the present and a directive for the future. The jewels, like the monarchy itself, were to remain tethered to the lineage she had nurtured and trusted most deeply. Charles remained stoic outwardly, but inside, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions churned. His loyalty to Camilla, tempered by years of navigating complex familial relationships, now collided with the unalterable authority of his mother's final wishes. The man who had spent a lifetime preparing to honor tradition and serve the crown was confronted with a stark reminder of the limits of personal influence. Even kings, it seemed, could not bend the careful architecture of a monarch's legacy. Across the room, Anne's expression remained calm, a careful mask that belied the gravity of her responsibility. She was not merely reading words. She was enacting the final act of a matriarch whose influence had been felt across decades. Every pause, every inflection, was deliberate, a reflection of her understanding that history was being shaped in this very moment. The Queen's message was unequivocal. The preservation of royal heritage, the honoring of bloodlines, and the subtle reinforcement of values that had guided her reign were to take precedence over personal relationships and public perception. The subtle dynamics of power, loyalty, and expectation were now laid bare. What had been whispered behind closed doors, speculated about in hushed tones by aides and confidants, was now made concrete, immutable, and undeniable. Camilla's exclusion was not a slight born of malice, but a deliberate assertion of principle, a crystallization of a monarch's understanding of legacy and lineage. For William and Charles, the revelation demanded careful navigation. For Camilla, it was a challenge that required both emotional fortitude and strategic foresight. Even as the last words of the will echoed in the quiet chamber, a tension lingered, one that would not dissipate with the closing of the document. The ramifications were already spreading outward, touching every corner of the royal household, influencing alliances, altering perceptions, and setting the stage for conflicts and reconciliations yet to unfold. In that moment, history was not merely recorded. It was actively lived, the characters within it forced to confront truths that could not be ignored. Outside the palace walls, the world would soon awaken to this revelation. Headlines would scream, analysts would speculate, and public opinion would swirl around interpretations and implications. Yet inside, within the sacred confines of royal tradition, a private drama of unparalleled emotional intensity was unfolding. The late Queen, even in death, had orchestrated a moment that demanded reflection, courage, and an understanding of the delicate interplay between duty and desire, tradition and personal relationships. The tension was palpable, almost electric, as each person in the room grappled with the weight of inheritance, history, and unspoken expectations. The jewels themselves, once symbols of continuity and grandeur, now represented far more. They were markers of trust, indicators of favor, and reflections of enduring principles that had guided a sovereign through decades of public and private life. And as Anne's voice carried the final sentences, each syllable resonating with authority, the room understood that the decisions contained within this will were not merely about objects of value, but about the shaping of a legacy that would outlive all of them. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Each member of the royal family was left to navigate the emotional landscape that the Queen had left behind. William contemplating his role as both son and heir, Charles wrestling with the boundaries of personal influence versus filial duty, Camilla reconciling with an exclusion that was simultaneously symbolic and strategic, and Anne, resolute and composed, bore the knowledge that she had just delivered a message that would echo through history, influencing perceptions, shaping narratives, and challenging assumptions about loyalty, inheritance, and the very nature of monarchy itself. As the last echo of Anne's voice faded, a new kind of silence filled the chamber, one that was thick with anticipation and unspoken questions. The late queen had always been a master of subtle influence, her decisions often layered with meaning that only became clear over time. This was no exception. The exclusion of Camilla from the jewelry legacy was not just a personal statement. It was a calculated reminder to the family, and perhaps to the world, of where true loyalty and heritage lay. The queen's intention was clear. The treasures she had carefully collected, many passed down through generations, were to remain within bloodlines she deemed direct and deserving. It was as if she had left a final test for her family, one that would reveal character, foresight, and the capacity to honor her enduring vision. William shifted again, his eyes catching the glint of sunlight bouncing off a chandelier, a reminder of the grandeur that surrounded them, and yet, the gravity of the moment could not have been more stark. He thought of his own children, and how the Queen's principles would shape not just Camilla's standing, but the very environment in which George, Charlotte, and Louis would grow up. There was an almost poetic symmetry to the decision, ancestral jewels, symbols of monarchy, being carefully assigned to those whose lineage could claim both legitimacy and promise. William's mind wrestled with the delicate balance between respect for his grandmother's wishes and the undeniable human emotions that came with them. Charles, despite his regal composure, felt a prickling unease. For decades, he had navigated the intersection of personal relationships and royal expectation, but the Queen's will now imposed a boundary that no amount of negotiation or persuasion could alter. His thoughts flickered momentarily to Camilla and to the nuanced dance they had performed together over the years, a partnership built on patience, discretion, and mutual understanding of the public eye. Now, that partnership faced a subtle but profound recalibration. He realized that the Queen's choice was not merely about jewels. It was about establishing a moral and historical precedent, a framework for interpreting loyalty and legacy long after her passing. Camilla herself remained a study in restraint, yet the flicker of emotion that crossed her face was unmistakable. Even the most seasoned among the royal circle could not mask the impact of such a public, yet intimate, declaration. To be excluded from a symbol of enduring heritage, the jewels that had witnessed coronations, intimate family gatherings, and decades of public service, was both a personal and political blow. In her mind, questions raced. How would this affect her public image? Would the press interpret this as a familial slight or merely a matter of tradition? And, most pressing, what did this mean for her future influence within the monarchy? Each question weighed heavily, forcing her to confront a reality that had been both predictable and surprising. Princess Anne's demeanor, by contrast, was a study in control. Years of navigating palace politics, public expectation, and familial dynamics had honed her into a figure capable of balancing authority with sensitivity. She understood the importance of this moment, not just in terms of inheritance, but as a statement of principle. Every eye in the room was upon her, yet she spoke only when necessary, letting the weight of the Queen's words resonate on their own, and knew that this reading would ripple far beyond the walls of the room, shaping narratives in newspapers, headlines online, and conversations in households across the United Kingdom. And yet, in her calm, deliberate actions, she embodied the very essence of the Queen's enduring values: poise, integrity, and unflinching adherence to the rules that govern both bloodline and legacy. The Queen's will was meticulous, precise, and unyielding. In its pages, decisions were articulated with clarity and purpose, leaving little room for interpretation or contestation. Camilla's exclusion was not merely a footnote. It was a central decision, strategically placed to ensure that the jewels, and the symbolism they carried, remained in the hands of those whose lineage the Queen trusted most. Kate, as the mother of the next generation, and Anne, as a stalwart guardian of royal tradition, were chosen deliberately. The decision reflected a vision that spanned generations, highlighting the Queen's understanding that monarchy was not static. It was a living institution, shaped as much by heritage as by the choices of those who served it. The room seemed to breathe collectively as the finality of the decision sank in. There were no arguments, no protests, only the silent acknowledgement of a truth that was both sobering and illuminating. For William, Charles, and Camilla, the Queen's message was clear. Personal feelings, however deep or enduring, could not override principles carefully considered over a lifetime. For Kate and Anne, it was an affirmation of trust, a recognition that they carried the weight of continuity not only in title but in moral responsibility. The decision, like a pebble dropped into a still pond, would send ripples far and wide, touching reputations, public perception, and family dynamics in ways that were difficult to quantify, yet impossible to ignore. And so, the reading concluded, the papers closed, and the room slowly exhaled, though the echoes of the moment lingered. The late Queen had spoken once more, and her voice, through ink and intent, reminded her family, and the world, that legacy was never accidental. It was deliberate, thoughtful, and often quietly unforgiving. This was the weight of history, the authority of a monarch who had understood that her influence would endure not just in life, but in death. And as the members of the royal family filed out of the chamber, each carried with them the knowledge that the delicate balance of favor, loyalty, and heritage had just been recalibrated in ways that would resonate for generations to come. The palace, for all its grandeur and historical weight, seemed suddenly smaller, more intimate. The corridors whispered with secrets that had now been laid bare, and the shadows cast by chandeliers seemed to stretch longer, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Outside, the sun shone indifferently, unaware of the quiet upheaval inside. Yet those within the walls understood that nothing would ever be quite the same. The Queen's final decision was more than legal. It was profoundly personal, a declaration of values, a shaping of history, and a reminder that even in death, a monarch's will could command attention, inspire debate, and challenge every assumption about family, loyalty, and legacy. This moment, frozen in the quiet intensity of the palace chamber, marked not just the passing of inheritance, but the passing of judgment, the setting of precedent, and the reaffirmation of centuries-old principles that had guided one of the world's most scrutinized royal families. It was a moment that demanded reflection, courage, and recognition of the enduring authority of a woman who, until her final breath, had understood the delicate balance of duty, legacy, and familial expectation with unparalleled clarity. The morning after the reading of the Queen's will, the palace was a quiet storm of whispered conversations, shifting alliances, and the subtle, almost imperceptible movements of courtiers and family members alike. For most, it was just another day in the royal calendar, marked by ceremony and tradition, but for those who had witnessed Princess Anne's reading, the weight of history was palpable. The exclusion of Camilla from the crown jewel's legacy was not merely a family squabble. It was a seismic declaration, reverberating across generations, public perception, and the fragile equilibrium of royal power. William was the first to arrive in the sunlit drawing room, the corridors eerily still, his footsteps echoing against polished marble. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, not just as the king-in-waiting, but as a son, husband, and father. The jewels were more than ornate artifacts. They were symbols of lineage, of history meticulously maintained, of authority that had been handed down over centuries. To inherit them was to inherit a responsibility that went far beyond the sparkle of diamonds and the sheen of gold. William understood this intimately. Each piece in the collection was a testament to the monarchy's continuity, a story of marriages, births, coronations, and sacrifices that had shaped the very institution he was destined to lead. For Charles, the impact was deeper, layered with personal and political complexity. As monarch, he had navigated decades of public scrutiny, private trials, and the delicate management of perception. Yet the Queen's will, in its unambiguous declaration, introduced a boundary he could not negotiate. It was a reminder that bloodline, loyalty, and principle had weight beyond negotiation, beyond personal desire. Even with his decades of experience, the exclusion of Camilla, someone he had protected, loved, and shielded from criticism, was a subtle rebuke that cut deeper than any public controversy. It was a quiet assertion. The monarchy had rules that even personal alliances could not bend. Camilla herself, moving gracefully through the palace corridors, was a study in composure, yet the flicker of emotion in her eyes betrayed the tension beneath. The jewels were not merely possessions. They were a legacy of the queen herself, a symbol of acceptance and recognition within a family where public perception and private trust often diverged. To be denied this inheritance was more than a financial matter. It was a statement of standing, of validation, of belonging. Questions circled her mind relentlessly. How would the public interpret this? Could she retain influence and authority despite the omission? And, perhaps most pressingly, how would this reshape the delicate web of relationships she had painstakingly maintained within the palace walls? Meanwhile, Princess and moved with deliberate calm, her presence commanding yet understated. Years of navigating palace intrigue had forged her into a guardian of tradition, a figure whose authority was both respected and, at times, quietly feared. She understood the implications of the queen's choices. Every member of the royal family, from the eldest son to the youngest child, would feel the ripples of this decision. By granting the jewels to Kate and herself, the queen was not merely distributing property. She was codifying principles, reinforcing bloodline continuity, and signaling the importance of integrity, duty, and foresight. Anne's awareness of this responsibility imbued her actions with gravity. Every glance, every measured step, reflected her understanding that legacy was as much about moral stewardship as it was about material inheritance. The jewels themselves, displayed in quiet splendor within their secure chambers, were artifacts steeped in history. Each piece bore its own story: a diamond necklace worn at coronations, a brooch that had accompanied a monarch through decades of public life, rings and tiaras whose craftsmanship had survived centuries. To hold one was to feel the pulse of history, to connect with the lives and legacies of those who had shaped the monarchy long before the current generation was born. For William and Anne, the inheritance was a symbol of trust and recognition, a tangible link to the past that demanded respect and careful stewardship. For Camilla, it was a glaring absence, a signal that some doors, no matter how much one might hope, remained closed. Conversations within the palace reflected this tension. Courtiers, aides, and advisors moved carefully, mindful of the fragile interplay of emotion and protocol. Observers noted the subtle shifts in body language, the almost imperceptible glances exchanged between siblings, and the unspoken acknowledgments of history being written in real time. Some speculated that the Queen's decision was influenced by a desire to reaffirm the monarchy's connection to bloodline legitimacy, ensuring that symbols of power remained in the hands of those whose claim could not be questioned. Others whispered about personal grievances, long-standing family dynamics, and the Queen's known penchant for meticulous planning and unwavering standards. Media analysts, watching from afar, seized upon the implications immediately. Headlines speculated on the potential fallout. How would this affect public perception of Camilla? Would William and Kate emerge as the new arbiters of tradition and taste? How might Charles navigate the delicate political and emotional landscape that this decision had created? For the public, the story was irresistible, a blend of personal drama, historical weight, and the timeless allure of monarchy. Every detail was dissected, from the choice of words in the will to the timing of its reading, creating a narrative that captivated audiences around the world. Within the family, the dynamics were equally complex. William, as heir to the throne, felt the dual pressure of honoring his grandmother's intentions while maintaining the delicate balance of family harmony. Charles confronted the reality that Camilla's exclusion was not a slight he could mitigate. It was a deliberate assertion of principle that he, as a father, husband, and monarch, could only accept. Camilla wrestled with the duality of public perception and personal feeling, striving to maintain dignity while absorbing a subtle yet profound rebuke. And Anne, positioned at the intersection of duty and familial loyalty, understood that her role as custodian of the jewels extended beyond mere inheritance. It was a responsibility to history, to continuity, and to the Queen's vision. Every conversation, every gesture, and every quiet glance reflected the tension and gravity of the moment. The Queen's will was not just a legal document. It was a message, a lesson, and a reminder of the enduring power of principle over preference. For those within the palace, the reading of the will was a moment that would be referenced, analyzed, and remembered for decades. It was a turning point, a reassertion of values, and an intimate insight into the Queen's understanding of what truly mattered in her final legacy: loyalty, lineage, and the careful stewardship of history. Even the youngest members of the family would, in time, feel the impact. George, Charlotte, and Louis, though distant from the immediate drama, were now inheritors not just of a monarchy, but of expectations shaped by decisions made long before they had a voice. The Queen's foresight ensured that her influence extended across generations, setting standards, guiding behavior, and subtly shaping the future of a family whose lives were intertwined with the very identity of a nation. As the day drew on, the palace seemed both familiar and altered, as if the very walls had absorbed the gravity of the moment. Conversations in the drawing rooms were punctuated by reflective silences, the staff moving with quiet efficiency, aware that history had just been quietly, but irrevocably, rewritten. In private corners, aides and advisors speculated about the implications, their whispers a testament to the enduring intrigue that surrounded the monarchy. And through it all, the jewels remained in their chambers, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama, their gleam a reminder of legacy, authority, and the indelible mark left by a queen whose decisions continued to shape the course of history. In this first chapter, the tension between personal ambition and historical duty becomes unmistakable. The exclusion of Camilla is not merely a personal disappointment. It is a deliberate, strategic decision that reasserts the Queen's vision of monarchy and bloodline continuity. The emotional weight, political implications, and public fascination converge, setting the stage for the complex interplay of family, power, and legacy that will unfold in the chapters to come. The stage is set for intrigue, reflection, and the subtle negotiations that define the lives of those bound by history, expectation, and the enduring authority of one woman's final wishes. The announcement of the Queen's will had not been televised, not because the royal family shied away from transparency, but because some moments in history were meant to unfold within the private walls of the palace first. When Princess Anne finished reading the final lines aloud, there was a silence so profound it felt as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Courtiers, aides, and family members alike struggled to reconcile the words they had just heard. Camilla, poised as ever, allowed her expression to remain neutral, but those who observed closely could detect the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slight constriction around her eyes. It was the silent shock of exclusion, a reaction that no protocol could fully mask. William, standing a few steps away, felt an unfamiliar combination of relief and anxiety. Relief because, in honoring the Queen's intentions, he could feel a renewed sense of purpose. Anxiety because he knew the magnitude of the situation. The decision was not merely a private familial matter. It would echo across the media, across public perception, and, most importantly, across the delicate balance of influence within the palace. Every glance, every step, and every whispered comment in the corridors could alter alliances, fuel rumors, and shape the narrative that would inevitably reach the public ear. King Charles, usually so composed in matters of state, found himself momentarily adrift in private reflection. He had long protected Camilla from the sharp edge of public scrutiny, carefully curating her image as queen consort, gradually positioning her to occupy a respected role in the monarchy. Now, in the wake of the Queen's unyielding instructions, he faced the stark reality that bloodline and principle could override years of political and personal investment. The jewels, the symbols of continuity, were to bypass Camilla entirely, moving instead to Anne and Kate, women whose connection by blood and marital union to the throne was indisputable. Camilla's mind raced with questions she had no immediate answers for. Was the exclusion a personal judgment, or merely a reflection of the Queen's broader vision for the monarchy? Could this decision be challenged, or had the Queen's words sealed the outcome irrevocably? The court of public opinion was a merciless arena, and Camilla knew that every observer would interpret the omission as a reflection of her standing within the royal family. In a world where perception often equaled power, even the most composed demeanor could be undermined by the whisper of a scandal, the hint of a slight, or the insinuation of exclusion. Princess Anne, ever the meticulous strategist, understood the stakes more clearly than anyone. She had navigated palace intrigue her entire life, balancing the weight of tradition with the exigencies of family politics. The Queen's decision to pass the jewels to herself and Kate was both a validation of her role as a guardian of royal heritage and a subtle lesson in authority, lineage, and responsibility. And recognized that the jewels were more than ornamental. They were tangible pieces of history, each item embodying decades, sometimes centuries, of legacy. To inherit them was to inherit a responsibility that extended beyond the personal. It was a duty to preserve history, uphold tradition, and guide the future generation of royals in the values the Queen had cherished. The courtiers, invisible observers in the drama of the morning, spoke in hushed tones. Discussions of protocol, inheritance, and optics dominated their reflections, but beneath it all lay the human emotions, pride, envy, anxiety, and a keen awareness of the fragile equilibrium within the palace. Some speculated that the decision was motivated by a desire to preserve the purity of lineage, ensuring that symbols of authority and heritage remained in the hands of those most directly connected to the Queen by blood or by strategic marriage. Others saw it as a reinforcement of the Queen's known standards. Loyalty, prudence, and a deep-seated understanding of the monarchy's delicate relationship with public perception. Outside the palace walls, anticipation grew. Journalists and royal watchers, ever alert to the subtleties of palace life, sensed the undercurrents of tension and significance. They knew that once the story emerged publicly, it would ignite discussion across media outlets worldwide. Headlines would speculate on the exclusion of Camilla, the empowerment of Kate and Anne, and the implications for Charles and William. Every detail, from the choice of wording in the will to the order in which the reading had occurred, would be dissected and analyzed, feeding the insatiable curiosity of a public fascinated by the private lives of royalty. Within the family itself, reactions varied and layered. William, aware of the public implications, weighed the personal and professional consequences carefully. He understood that the jewels were symbols not just of wealth, but of the monarchy's history and continuity. Their inheritance signified approval, trust, and recognition, but also came with the weight of responsibility. Charles, while internally grappling with the limitations imposed by the Queen's will, had to maintain composure for the sake of diplomacy, family unity, and public optics. Camilla, meanwhile, experienced the private sting of exclusion with practiced restraint, aware that any display of visible upset could further complicate the delicate web of relationships and perceptions surrounding her. The reading of the will also highlighted the subtleties of power within the royal family. While Camilla's influence had been cultivated over years of careful diplomacy and public favor, and in Kate's newly affirmed control over the jewels positioned them as custodians of history and gatekeepers of tradition. This shift was not merely ceremonial. It carried tangible implications for the distribution of influence, the shaping of narratives, and the preservation of royal legacy. The jewels, in effect, became more than ornamental. They were symbols of authority, stewardship, and strategic positioning within a family whose very identity was intertwined with the history and future of the nation. In the quiet corners of the palace, conversations between advisors, aides, and family members revealed layers of intrigue and anticipation. Speculation about potential rivalries, shifting alliances, and strategic maneuvering was unavoidable. Yet, amid the tension, there was also recognition of the Queen's foresight. Her decision, firm and unambiguous, demonstrated her understanding of history's weight, the importance of continuity, and the subtle yet powerful impact of symbols on perception and influence. By directing the jewels to Anne and Kate, she was sending a message that lineage, principle, and stewardship mattered above personal preference or immediate gratification. Even as the morning progressed, the emotional and political resonance of the decision remained palpable. Every glance, every whispered comment, and every quiet gesture carried significance. The palace, a structure steeped in centuries of tradition and ceremony, seemed to hum with the reverberations of a decision that would shape the dynamics of the royal family for years to come. The exclusion of Camilla, the empowerment of Anne and Kate, and the nuanced positioning of Charles and William all converged to create a tableau of tension, anticipation, and historical weight. The jewels themselves, silent and gleaming in their secure chambers, were now more than treasures. They were witnesses to a moment of subtle yet profound transformation within the royal family. They represented history, legacy, and the enduring power of principle over preference. They also served as a reminder that within the palace, every decision, every inheritance, and every symbolic act could carry consequences that rippled through generations, shaping perceptions, alliances, and the course of history itself. By the end of the day, the palace settled into a quiet rhythm, but the implications of the Queen's will lingered. Conversations, reflections, and private contemplations unfolded in every corridor, drawing attention to the delicate balance of family, history, and duty. William, Charles, Camilla, and Kate were each positioned differently, yet all shared the common understanding that legacy, principle, and history had converged in ways that demanded careful navigation, emotional intelligence, and unwavering respect for the Queen's final decisions. The crown jewels were never just ornaments. Each gem, each intricate design, each carefully crafted setting carried centuries of legacy, representing the monarchy's enduring presence through wars, revolutions, and generations of rulers. They were the silent witnesses to power, to triumph, and to tragedy. For Princess Anne and Princess Kate, the inheritance of certain pieces from the late Queen's personal collection was far more than a display of wealth. It was an acceptance of responsibility, a symbolic passing of the torch, and a profound affirmation of trust from the Queen herself. As Anne stood in the dimly lit room where the will had been read, her mind could not help but trace the lineage of each item mentioned. The diamond tiara that had adorned the Queen's coronation gown, the emerald necklace gifted to her by a foreign dignitary decades ago, and the set of sapphire earrings worn on countless state occasions. These were not simply jewelry. They were vessels of history, containing within them the stories, triumphs, and heartbreaks of a family that had spent centuries shaping the nation's identity. To inherit them was to become a custodian of memory, a guardian of tradition, and a participant in the ongoing narrative of monarchy. Camilla, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, was acutely aware of what was happening. The exclusion from this legacy was not a mere oversight. It was a deliberate, unambiguous decision by the late Queen. Camilla's mind replayed moments from the past, weighing her public persona against her private ambitions, questioning whether the years of effort to establish herself as a respected queen consort had been in vain. She knew that public perception could be forgiving, but history, once recorded, was far less malleable. The jewels were a tangible representation of status, influence, and legacy, and without them, her place in the narrative felt precarious. For William, the implications were equally profound. As the future king, his role in the distribution of the Queen's personal collection was a delicate balancing act. He was heir to the throne, protector of tradition, and steward of public trust. Ensuring that the jewels remained in the hands of those with direct bloodlines was not only a nod to the Queen's wishes, but also a reinforcement of the monarchy's continuity. Every decision he made in this moment had the potential to affect public opinion, family unity, and the very perception of the royal institution. The reading of the will had set in motion a series of private calculations, and, who had always been known for her meticulous planning and keen sense of duty, understood that inheriting the Queen's jewels was not merely about possession, it was about responsibility. Each piece came with an unspoken obligation to maintain the dignity, history, and ceremonial importance that it represented. Anne's experience in royal affairs, her understanding of protocol, and her unwavering commitment to the monarchy positioned her uniquely to shoulder this weight with grace and competence. Kate, though newer to the intricacies of royal legacy than Anne, approached the inheritance with a mixture of humility and determination. She understood that her role extended beyond the visible charm and public appearances expected of a royal. To inherit these jewels was to enter a lineage of custodians who had safeguarded history through both ordinary and extraordinary times. It was a commitment that transcended personal gain or recognition, demanding a deep understanding of heritage, protocol, and the subtle interplay between tradition and modernity. Camilla's exclusion also highlighted a broader theme of the monarchy's relationship with public perception. By ensuring that the jewels remained within the direct bloodline, the late queen reinforced a narrative of legitimacy, continuity, and historical fidelity. The public, often fascinated by the symbolism of royal artifacts, would perceive the decision as an affirmation of lineage and principle. Camilla's absence from the bequest, while private, carried inevitable implications for her public image, subtly reshaping the narrative of her role within the family and the monarchy at large. The historical significance of the jewels themselves could not be overstated. Many pieces had been worn by queens and princesses who had shaped the nation's history through diplomacy, philanthropy, and influence. They had been present at coronations, state banquets, and landmark events, each gem reflecting light not only physically but symbolically, capturing the essence of monarchy's enduring presence. To inherit these pieces was to inherit a fragment of history, a tangible connection to those who had come before, and a mandate to preserve that legacy for those who would follow. The courtiers, observing the unfolding scene, recognized the layers of emotional and political complexity. Each family member's reaction carried significance, interpreted not just by those present, but by the broader network of advisors, historians, and media commentators. Even in the private setting of the palace, every gesture, every glance, and every whispered word had the potential to ripple outward, influencing perceptions and shaping the narrative that would inevitably reach the public domain. The reading of the will also exposed subtle tensions between personal ambition and historical duty. Camilla, who had long sought recognition and influence within the royal structure, faced a stark reminder that legacy and bloodline often outweighed personal aspiration. And Kate, in contrast, were elevated not merely by proximity or favor, but by the acknowledgement of their role in preserving continuity and safeguarding history. The jewels, in essence, became instruments of both affirmation and exclusion, symbols that delineated boundaries of influence and power within the family. For Charles, the Queen's instructions presented a complex challenge. As monarch, he had spent decades balancing the demands of tradition with the expectations of a modern public. The jewels were emblematic of continuity, and ensuring they were entrusted to those most closely tied by blood and principle aligned with his broader mission of maintaining stability within the monarchy. Yet, the personal dynamics, Camilla's exclusion, William's positioning, and the public optics, required careful navigation to prevent discord or misinterpretation. The atmosphere within the palace was heavy with reflection. Each family member, advisor, and courtier understood that the reading of the will was not just a ceremonial act, but a pivotal moment with long-lasting implications. The jewels, silent and gleaming, were now symbols of authority, lineage, and the meticulous orchestration of legacy by a monarch who had understood the weight of history more acutely than anyone else. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace corridors, conversations quietly unfolded, reflecting a mixture of admiration, apprehension, and strategic planning. William, Charles, and Kate, and Camilla each processed the decision differently, yet all were united in understanding its significance. The inheritance of the jewels represented not only wealth and prestige, but a mandate to uphold the principles, traditions, and historical consciousness that had defined the monarchy for centuries. This chapter also marked a subtle shift in power dynamics within the royal family. By directing the jewels away from Camilla, the late queen reinforced the centrality of bloodline and principle in determining influence. And Kate's positions were strengthened, not just symbolically but practically, granting them a degree of authority and responsibility that extended beyond ceremonial roles. The palace, steeped in tradition and expectation, had witnessed a recalibration of influence, with the jewels serving as tangible markers of trust, legacy, and strategic positioning. In essence, the reading of the will was more than a private family matter. It was a moment of historical significance, a turning point that highlighted the delicate balance between personal ambition, public perception, and the enduring power of legacy. The jewels, now entrusted to and Kate, were both artifacts and instruments, reminders of the past, symbols of authority, and catalysts for the subtle realignments of power that would shape the monarchy in the years to come. By the time the day drew to a close, the full weight of the Queen's decision had settled upon the palace. Each member of the family, from the reigning monarch to the queen consort, understood that the implications would echo far beyond the immediate inheritance of jewels. The legacy of history, the preservation of tradition, and the affirmation of principle had converged in a moment of profound significance, setting the stage for both personal and institutional transformations within the royal family. The moment the contents of the late Queen's will became clear, a palpable tension gripped the room. Camilla, long accustomed to navigating the delicate corridors of palace protocol and public scrutiny, found herself confronting a reality she had not anticipated. This was not a simple matter of inheritance. It was a direct, undeniable statement from the Queen herself, a declaration that Camilla's place within the intimate circle of royal trust was, at least symbolically, limited. For someone who had spent decades carefully cultivating influence, earning public acceptance, and forging alliances, this was a jarring revelation. Camilla's initial reaction was a mixture of disbelief and controlled composure. She had learned, over years of experience, that outward reactions could be weaponized, twisted by the press, or misinterpreted by courtiers. But beneath her poised exterior, a storm brewed, a complex swirl of emotions ranging from hurt and frustration to strategic calculation. The exclusion from the Queen's personal collection of jewels was not just about material wealth. It was about recognition, legacy, and the subtle signals of approval and trust that history would remember. Observers noted a quiet rigidity in her posture, the careful folding of her hands, the slight narrowing of her eyes. Every movement was measured, a performance honed over years of experience in high-stakes social and political settings. Yet, even the most meticulous control could not entirely mask the ripple of disappointment. The message was clear. The Queen had chosen to bypass her in favor of her daughter-in-law and her own daughter, reinforcing the principle of direct bloodlines as paramount in matters of legacy. Camilla understood the implications. It was a subtle rebuke, a historical footnote that would frame her narrative within the family and the public record. For King Charles, the Queen's decision presented a nuanced challenge. As the reigning monarch, he had to navigate his dual responsibilities, honoring his mother's explicit wishes while maintaining family harmony and public confidence. Charles had long been aware of the delicate balance required in managing Camilla's role as queen consort. While her public duties and charitable endeavors had solidified her position in the eyes of many, her exclusion from the jewels highlighted lingering boundaries, a line that the late Queen had drawn with precision and care. Charles had to prepare for the inevitable ripple effects. Private conversations, media speculation, and the potential for internal resentment, all while ensuring that the monarchy's image of unity and continuity remained intact. For Prince William, the future king, the situation demanded tact, foresight, and an acute understanding of symbolism. The Queen's jewels were not merely valuable. They were emblematic of history, trust, and the continuity of the monarchy. Their distribution communicated messages that extended beyond familial relationships, reaching into the public sphere where perception shaped legitimacy. William recognized that supporting the will's directives was not optional. It was a duty to uphold tradition and reinforce the monarchy's integrity. Yet he also understood the need for diplomacy, ensuring that Camilla's exclusion would not escalate into a familial rift or public controversy. The palace corridors, usually a stage for formal ceremonies and controlled appearances, now hummed with subdued tension. Courtiers whispered in hushed tones, interpreting the dynamics and speculating on potential outcomes. Each glance, each carefully chosen word, was scrutinized, analyzed, and stored away in the mental ledger of palace politics. The reading of the will had transformed a private moment into a crucible of emotional and strategic complexity, and the ripples extended far beyond the room where the announcement had occurred. Camilla's advisors, long experienced in crisis management and royal protocol, quickly moved to provide guidance. They emphasized the importance of measured responses, private discussions, and the careful framing of any potential public statements. Any display of overt disappointment or frustration could be magnified, turning a personal slight into a public spectacle. The strategy was clear: maintain dignity, manage perception, and navigate the subtle currents of influence that flowed through the palace's inner circles. Yet behind the composed exterior, Camilla's mind churned with a blend of reflection and resolve. She revisited moments from her past, instances where she had been tested, challenged, and questioned by both family and public alike. Each memory became a lens through which she viewed the current situation, weighing her position, her alliances, and the avenues available to maintain influence despite the clear message delivered by the Queen's will. The jewels were significant, but the greater concern was historical narrative, the story that would be told about her, her legacy, and her role within the royal lineage. And Kate, meanwhile, approached the situation with measured acknowledgement. For Anne, the inheritance of the jewels was a natural extension of her lifelong dedication to duty, tradition, and the monarchy's continuity. She understood the weight of each piece, the historical narratives embedded in every gemstone, and the responsibility she now carried to preserve these stories. Kate, still relatively newer to the inner mechanisms of the royal family, absorbed the moment with a blend of reverence and determination, aware that the jewels were symbols of trust and a call to uphold heritage and protocol. The dynamics within the room were layered, intricate, and laden with emotional subtext. Each person processed the reading differently, filtered through personal history, ambition, and perception. Camilla's sense of exclusion contrasted sharply with Anne's recognition of duty and William's strategic awareness. The interplay of emotion, responsibility, and legacy created an atmosphere charged with intensity, one where every word and gesture could carry significance far beyond the immediate moment. Outside the private chambers, the wider world remained unaware, yet the implications were already being anticipated. Royal historians, commentators, and biographers understood that such a decision, while personal, held profound historical significance. Exclusion from the Queen's personal collection was not merely symbolic. It was a historical marker, a statement about lineage, principle, and the monarchy's approach to legacy. The public, when the details inevitably emerged, would interpret the story through lenses of intrigue, curiosity, and fascination with the royal family's inner workings. Camilla's response over the following days demonstrated a blend of strategic patience and quiet reflection. She attended public engagements with her usual grace, projecting composure while internally navigating a recalibration of influence. Conversations with close advisors focused on long-term positioning, public perception, and the subtle ways in which legacy and trust could be reinforced or contested. Each decision carried weight, balancing immediate emotional reactions with broader historical and institutional considerations. The palace staff, who had witnessed countless moments of protocol, ceremony, and family dynamics, recognized the unusual intensity of the current situation. Even routine operations, from event planning to ceremonial preparation, were now tinged with heightened awareness of the shifting power dynamics. Everyone understood that the reading of the will was not just a private family event. It was a moment that would resonate through history, shaping narratives, perceptions, and the subtle mechanics of influence within the monarchy. At the core of this tension was the stark reality that royal legacy was inextricably linked to both symbolism and material inheritance. The jewels, far from being mere objects, represented authority, continuity, and the recognition of trust. The Queen's deliberate choice to exclude Camilla underscored the principle that lineage and historical stewardship outweighed personal favor or ambition. This was a lesson in the enduring power of tradition, one that the royal family would navigate with a combination of diplomacy, discretion, and strategic foresight. As the chapter drew to a close, the quiet tension within the palace remained, a subtle but persistent undercurrent shaping interactions, decisions, and perceptions. Camilla's place within the monarchy was secure in title, but the symbolic exclusion from the Queen's jewels introduced a narrative of limitation, caution, and recalibration. And Kate, in contrast, had been elevated, entrusted with tangible representations of legacy and history. The interplay of ambition, duty, and symbolism had crystallized in a single, impactful moment, leaving an indelible mark on the family's internal dynamics and the monarchy's historical record. The moment whispers of the Queen's will began to circulate beyond the palace walls, an invisible current surged across the media landscape, carrying with it speculation, intrigue, and the inevitable storm of public fascination. For decades, the royal family had been adept at managing appearances, carefully calibrating what reached the press and what remained contained within palace corridors. Yet, even the most controlled households could not completely shield themselves from the inevitable curiosity that enveloped every decision, particularly when it concerned inheritance, legacy, and symbolic gestures. News outlets, both traditional and digital, seized on the story with ferocity. Headlines ranged from the measured to the sensational, each vying to capture the public's attention and shape perception. Queen Camilla cut out of crown jewels, royal shockwaves. One major publication blared, while another framed the narrative as a test of loyalty and historical fidelity. Bloodline versus consort. The Queen's will redefines legacy. Social media, with its instantaneous reach and relentless appetite for gossip, amplified every nuance, dissecting photos, body language, and past statements for hidden meaning. Within hours, the story became a global conversation, with speculation fueled by pundits, royal experts, and even casual observers eager to weigh in on what they saw as a drama decades in the making. The public fascination was not arbitrary. The monarchy occupies a space that is simultaneously private and intensely public, a complex stage where personal decisions carry societal weight. Camilla's exclusion from the jewels was interpreted through multiple lenses: historical precedent, questions of loyalty, and the perennial tension between bloodline and marriage. Experts debated the significance of the Queen's choice, weighing the symbolic implications against the practical realities of royal life. Was this a subtle rebuke, a reinforcement of tradition, or a reflection of personal preference and familial dynamics? The lack of clarity only intensified public interest, leaving room for interpretation, rumor, and conjecture. Commentators dissected the event with precision, tracing every action and decision back to decades of royal history. Analysts pointed out that the Queen had, throughout her life, demonstrated a meticulous attention to lineage and heritage. Personal relationships, while important, were often secondary to the principles she held regarding succession, inheritance, and the preservation of royal tradition. By passing her personal jewels to Princess Anne and Princess Kate, she reinforced a long-standing ethos that tangible symbols of monarchy should reside within direct bloodlines, preserving continuity for generations to come. Public sentiment was predictably divided. Loyalists lauded the Queen's commitment to tradition, praising her for upholding a principle that had guided the monarchy for centuries. Others, sympathetic to Camilla's decades-long service and careful cultivation of her public role, criticized the exclusion as cold and emblematic of the family's complex internal politics. Social media platforms became arenas of debate, with thousands sharing opinions, memes, and speculations. Royal forums and blogs dissected every angle, from the historical context of jewel inheritance to the personal implications for Camilla and the younger generation. Within this frenzy, Camilla herself remained a study in restraint. While media speculation intensified, she adhered to the palace's long-standing strategy of discretion. Public appearances were conducted with poise, yet insiders noted subtle shifts in demeanor, slight hesitations, measured smiles, and an attentiveness to the optics of her interactions. Her advisors carefully curated messaging, emphasizing charitable work, official engagements, and continuity of service. The underlying message was clear: maintain composure, navigate perception, and avoid providing fodder for sensationalist narratives, even as the world speculated relentlessly. The royal family, acutely aware of the scrutiny, implemented a series of internal measures to manage the fallout. Courtiers and advisors monitored media coverage, identifying inaccuracies, overblown claims, and potential sources of conflict. Strategic conversations focused on narrative control, reinforcing the importance of projecting unity, upholding the Queen's expressed wishes, and minimizing friction in the public eye. Every press release, photo opportunity, and public statement was carefully calibrated to convey stability, respect for tradition, and continuity of leadership. Meanwhile, historians and royal biographers seized upon the will's contents as a rare window into the late Queen's personal philosophy. Interviews with experts highlighted the symbolic weight of jewel inheritance, noting that personal collections often carry more than monetary value. They are repositories of history, memory, and influence. Passing the jewels to and Kate was interpreted as a deliberate effort to preserve the integrity of the royal line and ensure that objects of historical and familial significance remained in hands that would honor their legacy. Public fascination extended beyond traditional news outlets. Television programs, podcasts, and online channels launched deep dives into royal history, detailing past instances of inheritance disputes, precedents for excluding consorts, and the evolution of the monarchy's approach to legacy. Commentary was interspersed with archival footage, expert interviews, and visual storytelling, creating a rich tapestry of information that blended history with contemporary relevance. Audiences were captivated by the juxtaposition of tradition and personal intrigue, finding in the narrative a compelling mix of continuity, drama, and human emotion. Social media's rapid dissemination amplified every angle of interpretation. Memes highlighting Camilla's reaction, speculative analyses of body language during palace events, and discussions of historical precedent circulated widely, often blurring the line between factual reporting and entertainment. Influencers, royal enthusiasts, and commentators contributed to a constantly evolving narrative, in which each new observation or theory fed the next wave of speculation. The event became more than a story of inheritance. It was a cultural phenomenon, illustrating the monarchy's enduring capacity to captivate global attention. For the royal family, the challenge lay not only in managing perception, but in preparing for the long-term implications. Camilla's exclusion would inevitably be cited in future biographies, documentaries, and historical accounts. It was a moment that crystallized familial dynamics, the Queen's philosophy, and the ongoing negotiation between personal relationships and institutional priorities. Every decision made in the wake of the announcement carried both immediate and lasting significance, influencing relationships within the family and shaping public understanding of monarchy as an institution. Insiders described a delicate balancing act in the weeks following the will's revelation. Camilla engaged with her charitable initiatives with renewed focus, ensuring visibility in causes that resonated with the public and reinforced her commitment to service. William, Charles, and Kate navigated their roles with heightened awareness, understanding that every interaction, appearance, and statement could be interpreted in light of the recent inheritance announcement. The palace environment, usually governed by routine and ritual, was now charged with subtle tension, observation, and strategic consideration. The media's response continued to evolve, often reflecting shifting public sentiment. Initially dominated by shock and speculation, coverage gradually shifted toward analysis, historical context, and exploration of broader implications for the monarchy. Experts weighed in on the balance between personal discretion and institutional symbolism, discussing how the Queen's decisions could influence public perception, historical record, and the interplay between tradition and modernity. Audiences were drawn into the discussion, engaging with content that blended fact, insight, and narrative storytelling, reinforcing the monarchy's central role in cultural discourse. Camilla, ever aware of her image and legacy, began to subtly reshape the narrative through controlled engagements and strategic appearances. Photographs capturing her involvement in community projects, patronage of charitable organizations, and participation in ceremonial events were carefully disseminated, illustrating a narrative of continued dedication and resilience. Advisors emphasized consistency, patience, and the importance of allowing time to contextualize the Queen's decision within broader historical and familial frameworks. For Prince William, the situation was both personal and instructive. He observed the media's influence, the public's fascination, and the subtle mechanics of perception, recognizing that royal legacy is shaped not only by actions, but by narrative framing. Supporting the Queen's while managing family dynamics required diplomacy, strategic foresight, and emotional intelligence, a lesson in leadership, continuity, and the complexities of modern monarchy. As the media storm settled into ongoing analysis and debate, one truth became clear. The reading of the Queen's will had ignited a conversation about tradition, legacy, and symbolism that extended far beyond the palace walls. It had illuminated the tensions between bloodline and consort, public perception and private intent, and the enduring fascination that the monarchy commands worldwide. The narrative had evolved from private family dynamics into a public dialogue, reflecting the intricate interplay between history, emotion, and societal interest. In the hushed corridors of the palace, where whispers often carry more weight than proclamations, Princess Anne prepared herself for a moment that would ripple through the royal family and the world beyond. Known for her unwavering sense of duty, her sharp intellect, and an unyielding forthrightness, and had always been a figure who balanced tradition with a pragmatic understanding of the monarchy's inner workings. But the reading of the late Queen's will had placed her in a position that was as precarious as it was powerful. The decision to exclude Queen Camilla from the crown jewels inheritance was not merely a matter of legal documentation. It was a symbolic act, loaded with centuries of royal history and deeply personal implications. And, tasked with publicly reading the will in the presence of the family, understood the gravity of each word she spoke. Every syllable would be dissected, analyzed, and interpreted, not just by the immediate family, but by a global audience attuned to the subtleties of monarchy. Her voice carried the weight of both fidelity to the Queen's intentions and the inevitable tension that would arise from revealing such a consequential decision. The moment of delivery was meticulously orchestrated. Members of the family gathered in the stately room, their expressions a mixture of solemnity, curiosity, and concealed emotion. Cameras were absent, yet the presence of aides, legal advisors, and senior courtiers ensured that the event was both documented and historically precise. Anne's approach to the reading reflected her understanding of the delicate balance between transparency and discretion. She projected authority, clarity, and unwavering calm, her tone measured, yet imbued with a subtle gravitas that underscored the import of the will's contents. As she began to read, the initial passages were procedural, detailing the distribution of estates, trusts, and financial arrangements. The family listened attentively, aware that these sections, while significant, lacked the symbolic punch that would soon capture attention. Then came the segment concerning the crown jewels and the personal jewelry collection, an inheritance that transcended mere monetary value, embodying history, lineage, and the Queen's personal touch. Anne's voice, steady and deliberate, carried the announcement that the Queen's jewels would bypass Queen Camilla, instead being entrusted to Princess Kate and herself. The room fell into a tense silence, each member absorbing the implications of this unprecedented decision. For some, it was a moment of validation, a reaffirmation of the Queen's long-held principles regarding bloodline continuity. For others, it was a jolt, an emotional shock that challenged expectations and recalibrated relationships within the family. Observers would later describe the scene as a study in controlled revelation, and did not dramatize. She did not linger unnecessarily, yet every listener could sense the undercurrent of significance. Her precise articulation ensured that the decision was unambiguous, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The message was clear. The Queen's legacy would be preserved within her direct descendants, a deliberate reinforcement of heritage, continuity, and the sanctity of royal lineage. The immediate reaction from the family was a complex interplay of emotion, thought, and strategic calculation. King Charles, who had long navigated the intricate dynamics of duty and personal relationship, maintained a composed exterior, yet insiders noted subtle micro-expressions, raised eyebrows, tightened lips, and a fleeting pause that hinted at his internal processing of the announcement. Camilla, for her part, absorbed the revelation with dignified restraint, masking disappointment with measured poise, aware that any overt emotional display could be interpreted as impropriety or weakness. Anne's role extended beyond mere recitation. Her presence and authority in this moment underscored a deeper message, that fidelity to the Queen's wishes was paramount, and that clarity in communication was essential to maintaining the monarchy's stability. Her strategic delivery balanced empathy, professionalism, and historical awareness, ensuring that the announcement would be received with the seriousness it deserved while minimizing potential misunderstandings or internal conflict. The subtleties of Anne's approach were immediately noted by palace insiders and later dissected by historians. Her decision to read the will personally, rather than delegating to legal counsel, reinforced her reputation as a hands-on royal who prioritizes duty over convenience. It also served as a symbolic bridge between generations, linking the late queen's intentions with the living heirs responsible for carrying forward her legacy. Every gesture, intonation, and pause was carefully calibrated to convey respect, authority, and the enduring weight of familial obligation. Outside the walls of the palace, the impact of Anne's reading reverberated through media channels and social discourse. Reporters and commentators quickly seized upon the narrative, framing the event as both a dramatic family moment and a reflection of broader royal principles. The contrast between Anne's measured delivery and the emotional weight of the content provided a compelling storyline, illustrating the intersection of personal agency, institutional duty, and the enduring fascination with monarchy. Analysts highlighted Anne's calculated poise as emblematic of her broader approach to public life. Unlike other family members who may rely on charm, media savvy, or emotional display, Anne's influence is often subtle, rooted in consistency, reliability, and an unwavering adherence to principle. In this instance, her methodical approach to reading the will served not only to honor the Queen's intentions, but to reinforce her own authority as a custodian of legacy, an intermediary between past and present, and a stabilizing presence within a family often scrutinized for internal tensions. In the days following the reading, discussions within the palace focused on interpreting and signaling. Courtiers and senior aides noted that her demeanor suggested both empathy for Camilla's position and an unyielding commitment to the Queen's directive. It was a delicate balance, ensuring that Camilla's dignity remained intact while affirming that the Queen's wishes were absolute. Every word, every gesture, and every pause became part of an internal narrative, guiding interactions, expectations, and the ongoing management of family and public perception. Anne's influence extended to public messaging as well. By embodying the principles of discretion, duty, and historical awareness, she shaped the narrative that would reach the broader public. Commentators frequently contrasted her approach with speculative media coverage, noting that while headlines emphasized shock, controversy, and intrigue, the reality of Anne's actions reflected responsibility, precision, and an acute understanding of institutional legacy. For Camilla, the reading was both a personal challenge and a public lesson in resilience. Observers noted her ability to absorb the moment with grace, a reflection of her years navigating the complex landscape of royal visibility, public expectation, and private aspiration. Her composure, while tested, reinforced a message of stability, signaling that exclusion from the inheritance did not diminish her role, her contributions, or her public persona. Meanwhile, Princess Kate's reaction was a mixture of reverence, surprise, and responsibility. Receiving the Queen's personal jewels carried symbolic weight beyond material value.